Hey, welcome to the Crack House Chronicles. I am Donnie, your host, and with me is a man that wants to remind everyone that you're only drinking responsibly when you don't spill it. It's Dale.
That's right. It's kind of like gun control, being able to hit your target.
That's right, man. Or leaving the seat down.
Ooh, aim carefully.
Aim carefully. What's going on, dude?
What's happening, brother?
I'm in the Crack House.
Yes, sir. Ready to roll.
I'm ready to record, man.
Been a great week. Ready to get back at it.
Yeah, absolutely.
There you go. I'm right.
Yeah. You got any good shout-outs for us? Anything before we get going today?
We got a few here. How about this? We're going to shout out some folks who have been enjoying our Asia degree location video on YouTube. We've had quite a few great comments, and we'd like to shout out a few folks. How about Elaine Wilson, Christina Cole, Caden. No name.
No name, Caden. Just Caden.
Yeah. Shauna Elsie, Amanda Negret, Beth Fields, and Michelle Jordan. And I hope I didn't butcher anybody's name too bad.
Those were some great positive comments on our Asia degree locations video.
We loved it. And it was really fun to do. I hope we do some more soon.
Yeah, we are going to do some more soon.
When the weather warms up a little bit.
Yeah, and get out.
Yeah, we also like to thank everybody who went in and checked out the Susan Smith episodes 101 and 102. Man, we get a lot of high praise, and people think a lot of. We're just going to pat ourselves on the back because, what the hell? Nobody else couldn't do it.
Because we can.
Yeah. No, really, we had a lot of people tell us that we did a great job, and they really enjoyed those episodes. So we're pretty proud of them. We put a lot of work into them, and I thought they come out great.
Yeah, Susan Smith episode was really good.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, Dale, we are going to get started on this episode. I'm not even going to go into the Apple podcast or anything like that. We're just going to get started.
You ain't even going to sell a shirt or nothing?
No, I'm not going to sell a shirt. No. We're just going to get started.
Okay.
All right. But in this episode, this is episode 103.
It is. Big time.
103.
How about that?
Yep. We are going to do an interview.
Okay.
And we are going to interview a lady who is like the Wonder Woman of armchair detectives.
Wow.
Yeah, she is a...
Is that like Linda Carter or like the new stuff?
I'd say Linda Carter.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah. She is an armchair detective, and she has been researching the case that we're going to talk about for over 17 years. She's dedicated her life to this girl's story, trying to find out what happened to her.
Right.
And the lady we are interviewing, her name is Laura Riste.
Yep, and the funny thing about her, the case is in North Carolina, North Carolina-Tennessee border.
Yep.
And she's a little bit farther away than that.
She lives in Alberta, Canada.
It's like, 2,300 miles away or something like that. So it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, but we'll get her to give a little background on that.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And talk about this case. And like I said, she even has a room set up in her house for this case.
Yeah, dedicated to it.
Yeah. So she is an expert on the case we're talking about, but the girl we're talking about today is Trenny Gibson.
Right.
And we're going to welcome Laura to the show.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure having you.
Yeah, this is crazy.
Yeah. It's like I told Dale, we had planned on covering Trenny's case, and then I found out about you and you researching her. I was like, man, I'm a fool not to have her on the show because you're the expert on this girl.
Right. Foremost.
Well, thank you very much. I've certainly done my best, but I've been working on Trenny's case since 2005.
Wow.
I first ran across her story in 2003 on the Doe Network, and I got hooked. And back in those days, there was very little about Trenny on the Internet. There was one site that talked about Trenny disappearing along with Dennis Martin in 1969 and Pauline Melton in 1981, and of course Trenny in 1976. And they were lumped together as the big three that vanished in the Smokies and were never heard from again. Little bit of info. There was nothing on the Internet about her. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, tell us a little bit about you. What do you do for a living besides being an armchair detective?
I'm a professional chef.
Oh, cool.
Professional chef.
That sounds cool.
Yes, I'm a chef manager at a ski resort.
Oh.
I manage one of the restaurants and pubs that's on a ski resort. It's Sunshine Mountain Village in Banff, Alberta, Canada.
Very cool.
Like we need to come visit you.
Yeah, we need to go to Canada. No doubt.
And to relax, I research cold cases.
That sounds like a fun thing to do. That's pretty much what we do and some other true crime stuff too. So yeah, right up.
Well, I kind of got hooked on missing children, especially from the time I was quite small, because when I was a kid, that was around the time that Adam Walsh was abducted.
Yeah.
If you can remember back to that in 1981,
Oh,
he
yeah.
vanished from Florida, and then his father, of course, is John Walsh from America's Most Wanted. So that case was in the forefront when I was growing up, and my mother always had an interest in true crime. She used to read True Detective magazine, you know, those magazines with the rather sordid covers.
Yep, I remember those.
She used to hide them from me. And when I got about 10 years old enough to be home for a little while if my parents happened to go to town or something, I used to take those magazines out of the hiding spot, and I used to sit down with a dictionary, and I'd read them, and I'd have to look up some of the crimes committed in the dictionary because I didn't always understand what was going on, and so on and so forth. And I used to scare myself something silly where I couldn't sleep properly for a couple nights after that. And then I finally had to confess to my mother what I had done. But she was quite a true crime fanatic. We had books around the house about Ted Bundy.
Wow.
John Wayne Gacy. But my mother didn't like me looking at them, reading them. Because I wasn't old enough to understand what was going on, and I was an only child and rather sheltered by my folks. So, finally I got to junior high, and I just couldn't stand it anymore. I was reading her Ted Bundy books about John Wayne Gacy. I read Helter Skelter. That kind of freaked my teacher out in junior high. And I was just hooked.
Well, that's a good thing to get hooked on, though. It's fun. It's fun to research and learn something too.
Yeah, and a lot of it had to do with, you know, what drove these people to commit these acts, like to commit these crimes. And I would go through, like, I knew the victims' names, I knew their ages, everything else, where in the U.S. these crimes had been committed. Clifford Olson was a serial killer in Canada when I was growing up, so I knew, you know, bits and pieces about that case as well. But my main focus became missing children and teens, and especially from the 1970s and 1980s, because that's the era that I grew up.
Okay. Well, let's move forward to Trenny a little bit. Tell us about Trenny Lynn Gibson, a little bit about her in general, about her home life and her family and stuff.
Well, Trenny was 16 years old when she went missing. She lived in Knoxville, Tennessee. Originally, her family was from the Polk County area of Tennessee. There's a lot of copper mines there, although the mines aren't functioning anymore. When she was smaller, her family moved to Chattanooga for a while, and then they relocated to Knoxville. Her father was a salesman, and her mother stayed at home with the family. Trenny was the second oldest. She had an older brother, Bob Gibson, who was 2 years older than she. Then came Trenny, then came her sister Tina, and then came her little brother, Miracle.
Okay.
Miracle was only 5 or 6 when Trenny disappeared.
Okay.
The family was Southern Baptist. Their mother was very involved in the church. The family went to church on Wednesdays and Sundays. They did Bible study every morning before breakfast. Very, very devout Southern Baptists. The girls were expected to dress up for church, you know, skirts or dresses, that sort of thing. And their father was gone a lot. Like, he worked for an industrial chemical company, and he was often gone for 2 weeks out of every month.
Wow. Okay.
He traveled a lot for his work. And Trenny was close with her cousins on her mother's side that were back in Polk County. They'd visit summertime, Christmas. She was close to her grandmother. That was her mother's mother as well, and they would always go back and visit her. Trenny was probably the one out of the family that showed the most promise. You know, she had a level head on her shoulders. She wanted to be a landscape architect. She had a job part-time at a cafeteria in the mall.
She was very responsible then, huh?
Sounds like it.
Very responsible.
Mm-hmm.
She was saving her money. She wanted to get a small car, and she also wanted to go to the University of Tennessee.
Okay.
And she was the one in the house that, it was, somebody needs to fold the laundry. Well, they'd ask Trenny.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody needs to mow the lawn. They'd go get Trenny. Someone was needed to watch Miracle. They'd go get Trenny. Because they knew that if they got Trenny to do it, the job would be done, and it wouldn't be a half-assed job. It would be done properly.
Yeah. So tell us about the morning of her disappearance. Let's move forward to that Friday when they were going on the field trip. Let's get a little bit of background on that. They were going on a field trip that day, but they didn't know where they were going.
Well, that's kind of split. I've talked to students that claim that yes, they did know where they were going and they were told ahead of time. And I've talked to students that said no, they weren't aware because their teacher didn't want anyone following them up there. So he didn't tell them till the morning of the trip. And I'm not 100% sure what the backstory is on that, if there was a reason why the teacher thought that they might be followed to the park. When you have a cynical mind like mine, you try and cover all bases. Mm-hmm. But it's rather split. Some of the students said they knew where they were going, and other students said that, no, it was a surprise. They found out on the bus that morning. But Gibson, that's Trenny's mother, she was originally supposed to go as a chaperone on that trip.
Okay.
But what happened was she found out that the trip was going to be an all-day affair, and she couldn't find a babysitter for Trenny's youngest brother, so she decided to opt out of the field trip, and she stayed home.
Yeah.
The instructor, Mr. Dunlap, he tried the night before the field trip to find another chaperone, and he couldn't get anybody, but he decided just to go ahead with the trip anyway.
Okay.
Trenny originally thought the trip would be called off because the weather forecast was not very good. It was calling for fog, rain, potential snow, winds, and chilly temperatures.
But she wasn't even prepared for really outdoor weather. She really didn't know where they were going, but she wasn't prepared for any kind of outdoor weather at all because she didn't have...
Her mother is insistent that Trenny didn't know that they were going to be outdoors that day. For all she knew, they were going to a museum. She didn't know. She tried to cover all bases, like she wore a blouse and a sweater over top. She wore running shoes. She wore jeans, but she didn't take a jacket or hat with her.
Okay. That is just so crazy.
Going to the top of a mountain is not going to be fun.
No.
It's cold.
Mr. Dunlap, the teacher that was on that field trip that day, he was very comfortable and confident that where they were going in the park, there wasn't going to be any issue whatsoever. I talked to another fellow, Mr. Dan Mara. Now, Mr. Mara, he took over the horticulture class after Mr. Dunlap left later that year, after Trenny's disappearance. And he and Mr. Dunlap, they knew each other well from university. They both attended the University of Tennessee, and their botany class spent a lot of time in the Smoky Mountains, and especially in that area. So Mr. Dunlap was quite confident, I think, that, he could get up there, take the students up there, go around, hike, look at the flora and fauna, hike back to the bus, and go back to Knoxville.
Okay.
Something went terribly wrong, and that's why we're sitting here talking about Trenny all these years later instead of hanging out with her somewhere.
Right.
So Trenny got to school. She didn't know where she was going, and she asked another student, I guess walking down the sidewalk or going into the school.
Her mother gave her a ride to school that day. Trenny had her books and her purse with her and a bag lunch because, again, she wasn't sure if the trip would be called off and there would be classes instead.
Yeah.
Or what exactly would be taking place. But she stopped one of her students, fellow classmates rather, on the sidewalk and asked them, and they said no, the trip was a go. They were still going to go. So she left her books and purse in her mother's car, kissed her mother goodbye, took her bag lunch, and left. And when the students were seated on the bus, and Mr. Dunlap addressed the students then and told them that they were going to the Great Smoky Mountains, and there were cheers, claps, whistles, so on and so forth,
Mm-hmm.
and off the bus went.
What time did the bus leave the school that morning?
That's a gray area, probably around 8:30 in the morning, anywhere from 8 to 8:30.
Okay, so they just had time to go to school, maybe go to homeroom, and then leave, pretty much.
Yes.
Okay.
And according to what I've been told, the bus made a couple pit stops along the way. Granted, probably someone had to use the washroom.
Yeah.
A school bus can't travel as fast as a regular passenger vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time they arrived at the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, it was around noon.
Okay. That's a good little trip.
Mm-hmm.
It is a good trip, and the only adult was the bus driver and Mr. Dunlap,
Okay.
and 40 teenage students.
So I've heard it was like anywhere from 36 to 40 students. Is there an accurate count, or
Yes.
is
Well, no, there's not 100% accurate count, because I've been chasing Mr. Dunlap now for probably about the better part of 12 years, but I can't get the fellow to talk to me.
Mm-hmm.
He won't refuse my interviews. He just stays silent, and we can get into that a little more later if you like. But
Okay.
he will not talk to me about this.
Okay.
The information that I've been able to glean has been talking to other students that were present on the trip, talking to the school principal. I've spoken to him a bit, speaking with other teachers that are still alive, because, it's been 45 years.
Yeah.
But Mr. Dunlap, he remains silent on all of it.
Crazy. How did students that you interviewed, how did they say Trenny was going to the Great Smoky Mountains? How was her demeanor on the bus?
Nobody noticed anything out of the ordinary. They said that she was fine. She was sitting with Robert Simpson.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Robert Simpson was a good friend of her brother Bob. You'll find there's an awful lot of Roberts in this story, because Trenny's father was also Robert.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll refer to her older brother Bob Gibson as Robert Gibson Jr. rather. I will refer to him as Bob.
Okay.
And I will refer to Robert Simpson Jr. as Robert Simpson or Simpson.
Okay. That'll keep everybody separated.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah.
Less confusing, the better.
Nobody noticed anything out of the ordinary. Trenny was talking. She seemed normal on the bus. She and Robert Simpson sat together. They cracked a few jokes. Nothing seemed unusual or odd.
Mm-hmm.
When Trenny was hiking back down the mountain to the bus, she caught up with several groups of students and fell into step with them and walked. And they said she seemed fine, although she seemed in a bit of a hurry. That was the only thing that stood out to them, but she was pleasant enough, didn't seem upset about anything.
Mm-hmm. So they arrived at the Great Smoky Mountains, and I think I've read they parked at Clingman's Dome parking lot.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
And depending who you speak to, I've heard anywhere from there was several cars in the parking lot to there was only one or two cars in the parking lot. But everybody seems to say that there was at least one other vehicle in the parking lot. But it nothing really that stood out to anybody. They didn't seem to think that anything was odd or unusual. Mr. Dunlap told the students then what their assignment was, which was to hike to Andrews Falls and back to the bus, and they were to observe the flora and fauna in all the beautiful fall colors, which are abundant that time of year.
Mm-hmm.
But they weren't supposed to gather or collect anything. And they had to be back at the bus at 3:30. He asked if everyone understood, and show of hands. There was a unanimous show of hands, and then off they went. Mr. Dunlap did catch up, and he hiked with various groups of students throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
And the students basically set their own pace according to their hiking ability and so on. Trenny was hiking with Robert Simpson. Now, Trenny hadn't been sure if she wanted to go on the field trip or not. I mean, she was happy when her mother was going to go along as a chaperone, but then when her mother backed out, Trenny seemed to have some trepidation about going. So her brother, who was home on leave from the Navy, Bob, he spoke to Robert Simpson, which was a good friend of his, and asked him if he'd just kind of keep an eye on Trenny and make sure that she was okay for that field trip and whatever, because she had a little bit of trepidation about going.
But Trenny hadn't been many places, had she? She
was pretty sheltered.
Yeah.
No. Trenny was a homebody. I mean, her working at the cafeteria in the mall, you know, that was a pretty big step for her. She didn't really join any after school clubs or anything like that. She was friendly with other students at school, but she didn't really have a best friend that she went around with. Her sister Tina was much more social.
Mm-hmm.
Trenny was more quiet, more studious.
Okay.
She liked to spend time reading a good book.
Okay. All right. So they were on the trail hiking to Andrews Bald. This is I think it's about a little over 1.5 miles, 2 miles, I think, from Clingman's Dome parking lot to Andrews Bald. Mm-hmm. And along the way, I'd read that Robert Simpson had gave Trenny his jacket to wear.
Yeah, Trenny was cold. The weather was cold that day, and it was like, you know, that misty fine rain was falling. So she was cold, and he took off. He had one of those CPO jackets, they used to call them. It was like a shirt jacket, and it was brown and orange plaid, and Robert Simpson took that off, and he gave it to Trenny to wear.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty nice.
Yeah.
And they stopped, and they ate their lunches, their bag lunches, and they reached the Bald about 1:30, according to the statements that Robert Simpson had given the police. And they stayed there for a little bit, and they got underneath a tree because the rain really started to come down. And then, this is a gray area. We don't really know what happened next, but according to Robert Simpson, Trenny wanted to leave, and he wanted to stay.
Mm-hmm. So
he stayed, and Trenny left and went back down the trail alone, even though Robert Simpson was tasked with looking after Trenny by her older brother.
Right. So her older brother and Robert were pretty good friends, though, right?
Yes, they were.
Yeah. So basically, he just wanted somebody to look out for his little sister, seeing how she hadn't been very many places. Is that what you gather?
Yeah. Trenny and her brother Bob, they were always very close. And Trenny was very excited because Bob had just come home on leave from the Navy. He'd just come home Wednesday night, and he'd been gone for 11 weeks.
Oh, wow.
So she hadn't seen him since early July. So she was quite excited that he was back in town.
Yeah, I'm sure she was. It's been going that amount of time.
Mm-hmm. So then what happens next is Trenny's hiking back down to the bus. She seems in good spirits and everything. Maybe hiking a bit fast, but at the same time, you also got to realize the weather isn't very good.
Right. It's probably cold.
It's raining. She's probably getting wet, kind of cold. You know, if I was putting myself in her shoes at that age, you know, I'd be getting a little annoyed because my hair's getting wet and everything else.
Hair getting frizzy.
But,
yeah,
frizzy. She'd fall into step with other students and walk along with them for a ways and then overtake them until she came across another group. And then the last group that she hiked with, they said she was in good spirits. In fact, she seemed in a really good mood. And one of the boys in that group, he was wheezing a bit because he was asthmatic.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, with the altitude and everything else. And so they decided to sit down and rest. And they invited Trenny to sit with them, and she said no, she was going to keep going. And these students didn't think too much of it at the time because they were young. They were sophomores. And Trenny was a junior, and she tended to hang out with kids that were her age or a grade above her because her friends were kind of Bob's friends, even though Bob had graduated. So she went off walking, and the one girl that was named Anita, she said she watched Trenny just walk down the trail. She saw the back of her, and then she said it appeared as though Trenny stopped, crouched down and looked over to the right, and then went off the trail to the right of the trail, as though she saw something or something got her attention.
Mm-hmm.
And Anita thought it was strange enough that when she got up again and the group started walking, she stepped off in approximately the same spot that she thought that Trenny did. And she said she was surprised because there was nowhere to go, like there was no side trail or anything at that point. It was just like an uphill climb. So she kind of put the thought out of her head. The group carried on. They went back to the bus, and they expected to see Trenny back at the parking lot, and then she just didn't come back.
That is so crazy.
It is very. I was just sitting here thinking, I'm trying to put in my head what the trail actually looked like. You know, how is it like? How wide?
It's not very wide. It's not a very wide trail.
Right.
So, I mean, it's like, you know, two people could maybe walk side by side, but that's about it on some of these trails.
So when it's just like a dirt trail.
It is.
Okay.
It's just a
And
hiking trail.
approximately where Trenny stepped off the trail, there were some cigarette butts found and a half a can of beer. And the beer in it was still fairly fresh because you could smell it.
Mm-hmm.
And Trenny's uncles that were from Polk County, they came up and they helped with the search. And they're big hunters. So they know how to look for tracks and for signs. And they found a spot near with these cigarette butts and this beer can that looked like somebody had hunkered down and smoked these cigarettes. And the person that hunkered down was bigger and heavier, so likely a male. Then somebody hunkered down next to this person, and they were smaller and lighter, so possibly female, and they had size 7 Adidas tennis shoes on because they had left the shoe print in the dirt.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
And the cigarette butts and this beer can were collected carefully by taking a stick and picking up the beer can and putting it in the baggie and sweeping these cigarette butts into another baggie. But unfortunately, the Park Service didn't think they were anything of value and they were thrown out.
Oh,
Wow.
no. I was fixing to ask the next question. Oh, man.
But I mean, you know, we have to also look at the time, 1976, there was no DNA testing.
Right.
Your best case possible was to lift fingerprints off the beer can and then hope to God the person that handled the beer can had been fingerprinted so you could match them. But you'd have to sit and look at books and do it the hard way. So there was a lot of room for human error and so on and so forth. And cigarette butts in those days, how they matched things was through blood typing. So they might be able to get enough of a saliva sample off of the cigarette butt to say, okay, the person that smoked these cigarettes had type O positive blood. Well, there's about half the population, really.
Yeah.
So, I mean, anybody could have, you know, smoked these. So, you know, they had no idea what was going to happen in the future. I mean, none of us do, right?
Right.
So it's really a shame they didn't put them aside just, you know, in case something happens. In 25 years or so, we can test these, but they didn't.
Yeah, it's long gone.
Yep.
It's long gone.
That's sad.
So all the students, they get back to the bus. Mr. Dunlap has everybody go back to the bus. And,
That's right.
And they are allowed to search the parking lot but not leave the parking lot. Is that correct?
Well, what happened was at 3:30, the students were all back in the parking lot, you know, give or take a few minutes. And then somebody started saying, well, where's Trenny? Mr. Dunlap was calling roll, and
Okay.
Trenny was missing. And kind of, you know, a funny, panicky feeling went through the bus. And then somebody said to Robert Simpson, well, Trenny was hiking with you. And he said, yes, she was. He said, but when we got to the balls, he said she went her own way back down to the bus. He said, and I went tracking a bear.
Tracking a bear, huh?
Maybe he was drinking a beer.
That's what he said.
Maybe.
So Mr. Dunlap, he kept his head. He decided that he was going to hike to Double Springs and back in case Trenny accidentally got on the wrong trail.
Mm-hmm.
And he sent Danny Johnson, another Bearden student, to hike to Andrews Bald and back just to see if Trenny had maybe stepped off the trail but got back on, or she walked back to where they were, or whatever. And the rest of the students were told that they could search the parking lot, but they had to stay within it. And the bus driver at this time, he stayed with the bus because that was the Knoxville County School's mandate, is the driver had to remain with the school bus.
Yeah.
So Mr. Dunlap, he hiked to Double Springs and back. He didn't find anything except some Adidas tennis shoe prints on the Appalachian Trail.
Okay.
Danny Johnson hiked to Andrews Bald and back, and he didn't find anything. And I've interviewed Danny Johnson as well.
And Danny didn't see anything?
Nope, nothing.
Wow.
And interestingly enough, when I spoke to Danny, he claimed that he walked back to the bus with Robert Simpson and Trenny that day. And I said, now you're positive you walked back to the bus with Trenny and Robert Simpson? And he said, oh yeah. He and Robert Simpson, they were good friends. People used to call him the odd couple because Danny was a track star. He was a preppy kid, you know, the shirts with the collars and everything else. And Robert Simpson was an overweight guy, kind of unkempt, long hair. He wore overalls and he was overweight. And people used to tease them and call them the odd couple. And they would go on hiking trips occasionally in the Smoky Mountains, and they kind of bonded over that. But Danny was adamant that he walked back to the bus that day with Trenny and Robert Simpson. And Trenny excused herself to go to the washroom once they reached the parking lot, and she just never came back. And when I spoke with Donnie the other day, he had texted me actually and asked me, you know, did any of the other students have a varying story? And that is one story. The other story I have was Trenny didn't go on the hike at all. The bus pulled into the parking lot. The students got off the bus to go on the hike. Trenny got into a waiting car, and that was the end of the story.
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that anywhere. And I don't tend to believe that because you had too many people seeing her on the trail.
Well, yes, that's what I say as well.
Mm-hmm. But Danny's story of saying he walked back to the bus with her and Robert Simpson.
Yeah. And Trenny excused herself. She needed to go to the washroom. There was a building where the washrooms were. And she went to the washroom and just never came back.
How confident are you in believing that story, Laura?
I'm really on the fence with that. Like, I questioned Danny quite in depth. Because I also happen to know that his girlfriend was on that trip that day. And I said to Danny, I said, are you going to let your girlfriend walk all the way back down to the bus by herself while you walk back down to the bus with Trenny and Robert Simpson? I said, granted, Robert Simpson and you are friends. Danny said that he barely knew Trenny at all. But I said, are you going to let your girlfriend walk by herself to the bus while you walk with Robert Simpson? I mean, you can walk with Robert Simpson anytime, but you're going to let your girlfriend walk back down to the bus by herself. And he didn't really have an answer for me. But something just didn't sound right about the story. Not that he was a flat out lying, more like maybe just misremembering a few things. Right. I mean, we got to also understand it's been 45 years.
This is true.
People that were on that field trip, they're 60 years old and more. It's very easy to misremember something.
Yeah, these people are senior citizens now.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
But I happen to know that his girlfriend was on the field trip, and I also happen to know that they had a track meet the next day, and on the way back, they stopped at the Great Smoky Mountains National Park to see if they could be any help with the search for Trenny.
Okay.
So I don't think that Danny's lying. I'm certainly not accusing him of anything. I just think he's misremembering a few points.
Could very well be.
Right.
Yeah, because I remember field trips I was on in school, but I couldn't tell you who I walked with on certain things or hung out with at certain points.
Well, no, but of course, if your girlfriend's on the field trip with you, you're going to walk back to the bus with her.
This is true.
Oh, yeah.
You're not going to walk back with Robert Simpson I mean, you can go hike with him anytime, but if your girlfriend is here, you're going to go hike with her.
If
Yeah.
you do, you
And
better
Trenny, he didn't know well at all.
Yeah.
They didn't travel in the same kind of circle.
Mm-hmm.
Like he said, he said nothing against her or anything like that, but he said, I don't think I ever said 20 words to her. He said, I just didn't know her.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's discovered Trenny is missing. Mr. Dunlap goes to search. Danny goes to search. Mr. Dunlap finds footprints. Danny finds nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Dunlap gets on the CB radio and he radios the park, and a ranger came out, and same thing again. They checked Andrew's balls. They checked Double Springs. No Trenny. So then Mr. Dunlap made the decision that he would stay behind and search for Trenny, and he'd send the bus of students back to Knoxville.
How did Robert Simpson look when he got back to the bus? But, because he'd been with Trenny for a while. How did the other students say?
Nobody has ever told me, with all the people that I've interviewed, that there was anything out of the ordinary. When Trenny disappeared, she was still wearing Robert Simpson's jacket.
Okay.
And all Simpson had to say was he had gone tracking a bear, and Trenny just decided to walk back herself.
That is the craziest thing. Tracking a bear.
Yeah.
It is. And, I will point out that Robert Simpson's father was deputy DA in Knoxville at the time. So Robert Simpson would have had legal counsel through his father.
Yeah.
His father might have told him that, okay, I know that sounds ridiculous, what you said, that you were tracking a bear, but now you're going to have to stick with that story because that's what you said that you were doing. Ridiculous as it sounds, you're going to have to stick with it now.
I think he should have just said he was drinking a beer. It just sounds like more something would happen.
Well, a more plausible explanation he could have said was, I really have to go to the bathroom, and I told Trenny that, and I said to her, look, would you care to wait for me while I go tend nature's call, and then I'll come back in a minute, and we'll hike down together. And then when he came out of the brush, she was gone.
Right.
Yeah, that would have been more
That
believable.
would have been a far more believable explanation than he went tracking a bear. I've had a lot of chuckles from people over the years with that once they hear that story.
Yeah.
It's also a possibility that he told Trenny he was going to go track a bear, and she thought he was an idiot and wanted no part of this, and she got the hell away from him.
Yeah, I would have too. I wouldn't want to be around a bear.
No.
She was a level-headed girl. I mean, he didn't have a firearm. You're going to go, tangle with some smelly old bear. I'm sorry. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, Mr.
And then, once she got home, seriously questioned her brother's best friend.
Yeah.
And his sanity kind of thing. But it could have been something like that. But what I rather garner from it is Robert Simpson seemed to want Trenny to go off on her own. And, it's possible he wanted to go track a bear, and she said, the hell with you, and she left. Or Robert Simpson said something or did something to get her to go off on her own, aside from telling her that he was going to go track a bear.
Yeah. I think I'd heard you say before that Robert Simpson may have had a crush on Trenny.
Yes, he did, and he was not really what you'd call dating material. He was a nice enough guy. I haven't heard anybody say that he was a jerk or anything like that. He was a big kid, though. He was probably 300 pounds.
Oh, gosh.
And rather unkempt, long hair. He wore overalls to school. Overalls to school in high school in 1976 really wasn't all that cool. But when you're a bigger fellow and that's what fits, and if it's clean and you can button it, then that's what you wear.
Yep.
But he really wasn't, he wasn't what you'd call dating material. If he did get girls interested in him, it was because he was always willing to give people rides. He had a big old, Impala car, and he was a lawyer's son, so he probably had money to burn.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So he was
that'll get you some friends.
He was the taxi then, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then he was a good friend of Trenny's brother, so Trenny had been in his car before, you know, he'd given her a ride and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And she felt safe with him because he was her brother's friend.
Yeah. All right. Now, Mr. Dunlap, he sent the bus back to Bearden.
Yes.
And he stayed behind and helped search for Trenny.
That's right.
Okay. But that evening, like most of these other stories we've covered, the weather gets bad.
The weather gets very bad. The wind picks up, the temperature drops, the rain intensifies.
That's just like Dennis Martin.
About 6:30 that evening, 4 other rangers showed up. They brought flashlights, flashlight batteries and everything, and they were out searching for Trenny.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that tower was never searched, the Clingman's Dome Tower.
Yeah.
They did search. There was a room at one time in the base of the tower. It was like a utility room, a storage room. And at one point, they did break the lock off the door and look inside it, but there was no sign of Trenny. But the tower itself was not searched.
Now, there were some students that claimed that the bus was followed on the field trip.
On the way to there.
Some of the students had gone to Mr. Gibson, Trenny's father, and said that they were followed to the park. A car was following behind them. A variation of that story is that Calvin Bowman was following the bus.
Let's get a little bit of background on Calvin Bowman.
Well, this is quite an interesting story, so I hope your listeners sit down and hold on to something. But Calvin Bowman was a fellow student at Trenny's, and he was a year older, so he was a senior, same as Robert Simpson, a year older than Trenny was, and he was a black student. In those days, there were very few black students at Bearden. If you look through the yearbook, there's maybe a handful.
Okay.
Definitely a minority. But Calvin Bowman, he was from a large family, and several of his brothers and sisters, they attended Bearden. Calvin Bowman showed a lot of promise when he was younger, both at baseball and basketball. In fact, some of the classmates that I spoke with, they said that they had always hoped that Calvin would follow that and play sports because it might be a way out for him. Then, you know, he might get a scholarship or something to that nature, be able to go on to post-secondary education and have it paid for, because his family was not financially well off.
Yeah.
Trenny and Calvin Bowman were for the most part friendly when Trenny started high school at Bearden High.
So they knew each other then.
Yeah, they knew each other. She was friends with Calvin's sister Annette. And some students say that Trenny and Calvin were a little more than just friends. Maybe possibly dating, but I mean, in those days, a white girl dating a black boy, that was bad news.
Yeah,
it wasn't like it is nowadays. The twain didn't meet in those days.
Yeah.
And, you know, being from a strict Southern Baptist family, that would not have been a good thing if Trenny brought this black suitor home. So for the most part, their relationship just stayed at school. On October 11th, 1975, almost a year to the day that Trenny would go missing a year later, Calvin Bowman showed up at the Gibson residence, and he was out on their lawn, and I was told he was very intoxicated, and he was looking for Bob Gibson. He kept calling for Bob, Bob, Bob.
So he knew Trenny's brother Bob.
Yes. Miss Gibson, Trenny's mother, was home alone. Bob was not there, and neither was her husband, Mr. Gibson Sr. She was home alone with the two girls, Trenny and her sister Tina, and their youngest son, Miracle. Anyway, Miss Gibson, to defend her household, she had gotten her pistol out from underneath her pillow, and she was watching this figure on the lawn calling for Bob. Well, this figure seemed to know exactly what window Trenny's window was. So this person went over to Trenny's window and sort of hunkered down there because they have these planter boxes in front of the window. So Miss Gibson said she thought she heard glass breaking, and when this person stuck out his foot, Miss Gibson fired and shot this person in the foot.
Wow.
So Miss Gibson went storming down the hall to get this person out of her house, and Trenny came flying down the hall to meet her because Calvin Bowman, yes, he smashed the window. He'd been shot in the foot, but he gained entry to Trenny's bedroom through the broken window, and at one point, he was trying to drag Trenny out and drag her out onto the lawn.
Good grief.
Yeah.
But he came out of Trenny's bedroom with his hands up, and Miss Gibson said she paused for a moment because she stopped because she realized that this person was very intoxicated, and he does belong to somebody. He's some mother's son, so that kept her from firing.
So he'd done been shot, and he knew she had a gun, but he still came in the house.
Yeah. He's about the only person I've ever known, and I told this to Donnie, that has been shot and then come into the house, I guess so the homeowner could finish the job. I really don't know. I don't understand that. I don't know why you wouldn't book it the hell out of there, but he came in.
How dumb is that?
Crazy.
But anyway,
he was very lucky Miss Gibson showed mercy and didn't blow his head off his shoulders.
Yeah, she could
if
have.
that had happened in my house, that's exactly what would have happened.
Yeah, they'd been coming carrying him out of the door, out of the house in a bag.
Well, in my house, it would have been what particles they could have put in a bag.
Yeah, there you go.
It would have been, my mother would have complained what a mess it made and probably engaged me in helping clean it up. But seriously, that is the only time I've ever heard of that. Miss Gibson said that she didn't know, she said in those days, pot was very popular, but she didn't know if perhaps Calvin was taking something else. She just said he was very, very drunk.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to wonder if he wasn't on pills of some sort, speed, something, tripping the light fantastic, because obviously he wasn't thinking clearly.
So Calvin was put away for a little while. He went to juvenile detention for a while.
The Gibsons did have him charged, and he was sentenced for 2 years to juvenile detention. He made threats in the courtroom, basically threats like, I'll be back and I'll get you and I'm going to kill Trenny when I get out and things like that. And he was in court on crutches with his foot in a cast. When did he get out of juvenile detention? He was sentenced to 2 years, but he served less than 6 months.
What the heck?
Yeah, and he was back at Bearden. He came back to Bearden, and he was there at the time that Trenny went missing.
Mm-hmm.
And her mother told me that he was heckling Trenny, giving her a hard time, talking smack to her and things like that. And Trenny didn't have her older brother Bob there, because he'd already graduated. He was in the Navy, because he definitely would have put a stop to it.
Yeah.
But he wasn't there at the time.
So I think it's safe to say that Trenny was frightened of Calvin Bowman.
Or she's terrified of him.
Okay.
Yeah,
if she would have seen him anywhere on that field trip, she would have hightailed it to that bus like there was no tomorrow.
And if
she had seen him anywhere in the parking lot, she never would have got off the bus in the first place.
Exactly.
She was very scared of him.
I can't believe they let him back in school after all that.
Yeah. So crazy.
According to what I've been told by the school principal and his daughter, I've spoken to her and she's been very forthcoming. Calvin was a troublemaker. His problem was that he hung around with an older crowd of students, and he always got into crap that way. He hung out with the party kids, the older kids. And he did spend a lot of time in her father's, the principal's inner office, being disciplined for something or another. But he did graduate.
Okay.
Well, at least there's that.
I will also point out in 1979, when he was 20 years old, Calvin Bowman was charged with third-degree rape and assault and sentenced to 10 years in prison.
Oh, wow.
He followed a woman home from a bar and got into her apartment on the pretense of just wanting a glass of water and then raped her on her sofa.
Oh, man.
So how confident are you thinking that Kelvin had something to do with Trenny's disappearance?
Well, like I was telling Donnie when we spoke the other day, Calvin definitely had an axe to grind.
Yes.
He definitely was wanted revenge in some form. for what Trenny had done, even though she hadn't done anything but what her mother had done. Instead of looking at it, you know, from an adult perspective, well, you know, I guess it was kind of stupid what I did. You know, I broke in there and I tried to drag Trenny out of her bedroom onto the lawn, and her mother shot me. Instead of looking at it that way, he's looking at it at the typical juvenile perspective. It's all the Gibson's fault.
Mm-hmm. Crazy.
So Calvin definitely had motive. The problem is trying to prove how he would have gotten to the park, because he was not part of the horticulture class.
But he was at school that day, correct?
He was at school that day, according to Mr. Hall.
Okay.
But Bearden was not exactly what you'd call stringent about their attendance record. In fact, Mr. Hall left Bearden a couple years later. I believe it was in 1979, so 3 years later, at the end of the school term of 1979, and that was one of the reasons that he was reassigned. Was there was terrible attendance taken at Bearden High.
Hmm.
If you were in college courses where you got credit for these college courses, if you were at advanced level, they were very strict about taking attendance in those courses. If you were just in regular mainstream high school, a lot of the students told me you could show up till lunchtime and then take off for the rest of the day, and 9 times out of 10, nobody noticed.
Man.
Wow.
One of the thoughts is perhaps Calvin showed up for homeroom, was marked as being present for class, then took off, and then went to the Smoky.
Yeah.
But he would have had to have had a car, and from what I can ascertain, Calvin did not own a car. He would have had to borrow one from somebody else.
Okay. But some of the students claimed that Calvin was the one that followed him.
That is one variation of the story. One variation is just that they were followed. Another variation is Calvin was following the bus. Yet another variation is he was following the bus in Robert Simpson's car.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, you also need to look at it from another perspective. If Calvin Bowman and Robert Simpson were in on this together, how were they able to communicate up in the park?
Right. They could.
Yeah. And these are just high school students. They're
just high school students. That doesn't mean they're not capable of harming another. I'm not trying to rule that out.
Yeah.
But they would have had to be in sync and been able to coordinate this whole thing.
And a lot of planning.
There would have had to have been a lot of planning, and they would have had to have gotten damn lucky. They did get lucky with the weather. With the weather obliterating any tracks, signs, that sort of thing.
Yeah. I can't even plan to go to the grocery store these days. I mean, for them to pull something like that off,
especially not knowing where they were going.
So with Trenny.
Well, I've had people tell me, you know, this couldn't have happened. They couldn't have done it. You know, this is the Bible Belt in the 1970s, and I said, you can stick your head in the sand all you like, but I said, you know, murder still happened in the Bible Belt in the 1970s. I said, you know, don't make me spout statistics for you.
Oh yeah, sure.
I said it could happen. I'm not ruling it out. I told her all I'm trying to say is, if you bring in too many people into this story, you run into problems with how they're communicating with one another.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, it's not like nowadays where you can just text somebody. None of that technology was available in those days.
No.
If Calvin Bowman followed the bus to the park, okay, obviously, yeah, he knows they're going to the park and whatever. He's got to make sure he parks somewhere where he's not going to be seen, or Trenny's going to freak if she sees him. So he's going to have to park the vehicle somewhere. He's going to have to hide somewhere. Then somebody's going to have to find a way to get Trenny to him. And how are they going to communicate with one another?
Right.
That is a lot of planning if that's the case. I mean, I don't even know if our government could pull something like that off. I mean, that's a lot of planning.
It's like one of those complicated football moves.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, really. So what's another theory on Trenny's disappearance that's you're on the fence about?
That she ran away. I don't believe that she ran away. That was a theory that came up. It often came up among the classmates, and it came up among the park service. Well, where did she go? Why was there no sign? Like she was here one minute, gone the next. I mean, that's not supposed to happen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how could you account for this other than she ran away? Well, the thing is, if Trenny was going to run away, she had a very level head on her shoulders. She had a couple $1,000 in her bank account, and she had a couple $100 in her desk drawer at home. She didn't take any of that money. She didn't take her bank book for her money that she had in the bank. She didn't take her purse. She left that in her mother's car. That had her ID and everything in it. She had nothing but the clothes on her back, Robert Simpson's jacket, and that's it. She had her comb on her, and that was it.
Yeah.
What she had on.
Well, let's talk about this
She
comb.
was definitely. Oh, the comb story. Yeah, this is quite not as colorful as the Bowman story, but it's interesting. Trenny had this comb that her mother had bought for her, and she bought an identical one for her sister Tina. It was one of those really thick, heavy combs from that company that was called Stanley. Kind of like that Fuller brush, where they used to sell stuff door to door.
Right.
Well, anyway, it was a nice, thick, heavy comb, and Trenny loved the thing. She had wavy hair, and it was a perfect comb for long hair, and she always used to have it tucked into her right front pocket of her jeans, because like me, she was right-handed. And she'd pull the comb out every once in a while and run it through her hair. And it was a nice, heavy one, not, the 15-cent drugstore variety. And she just loved this thing. Trenny was very particular about her things. Like, her comb would never have a bunch of hair wadded in it. She didn't loan it to other people. Her things were her things. But after Trenny disappeared, this comb was found in Robert Simpson's car right on the dashboard. And that raised a lot of alarm bells where how in the world did her comb get in Robert's car?
Yeah, she would have never given up her comb like that.
No.
No. And Robert Simpson had been using it to comb his own hair.
Ooh.
And her mother said Trenny would have just about died because it was all wrapped and wadded up with Robert's long hair.
How did he end up with her comb?
Do we know?
No, he said that the story that Robert Simpson gave, was that Trenny had given it to him to hold for her. Robert Simpson really fostered the runaway story. He said that Trenny had given away her comb, given it to him to hold for. And Trenny had a ring. It was a star sapphire ring, and it was quite valuable, moderately so. Any jewelry she had been a birthday or a Christmas gift. Anyway, Trenny's ring turned up. One of the sophomore girls had it in her possession. And when questioned by how she got this ring, she said that Trenny had given it to her to hold for, to keep for her. And they fostered the theory that Trenny was giving away her possessions, maybe because she was taking off. But I mean, Trenny would have kept her comb.
Yeah.
Would have kept her ring.
Yeah, don't make any
Nothing
sense.
else she could have pawned her ring. It was fairly valuable.
No, I think if she was going to run away, she could have done that long before.
What always irritated me is why the hell people seem to think Trenny had to go on a field trip to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and she would run away from there. When she was from Knoxville, there's buses, there's trains, there's planes, there's everything.
Right.
There's thousands and thousands of cars going through that city, in 1976. It's so easy to go anywhere she wanted to go. Why would she go out in the middle of nowhere to a park where she's never been there before, doesn't know left from right or up from down, and she's going to run away from there?
Yeah, she would have been
when
way
really
better
all
off.
she had to do was tell her folks that, I've got to work today, and she could have went and taken off, and no one would have been the wiser.
Right.
Now, there's a theory you talked about when we talked about on the phone. Trenny's brother had something to do with her disappearance because he just come home from the Navy.
I always believed that Bob had a hand in something. Now, before anybody gets excited, I don't mean he necessarily harmed Trenny. But I think what happened was he showed up at the park and had a plan to take Trenny somewhere. Bob, he liked to drink. He liked his beer. He also smoked. And the beer can and the cigarette butts, they were both from brands that Bob typically smoked and typically drank. He was also known to take drugs. And Trenny would have gone anywhere with Bob. You know, she was crazy about her older brother. He'd come home on leave from the Navy. She was so excited to see him. If somebody had put a bug in Trenny's ear when she was up on Andrew's balls, hey, you know, I was saving this for a surprise, but Bob drove up here. And he's waiting just down the trail for you a ways. I gotta use the bathroom. Why don't you go down and catch up with him? And then when I finish Call of Nature here, I'll follow you down and we'll get together with Bob and, you know, maybe we'll go back to Knoxville or, you know, hang out for the afternoon or do whatever Bob feels like doing, sort of thing. Trenny would have gone off like a shot. She was crazy about Bob.
Yeah.
That was one of the things I've often said to people, well, why didn't Trenny scream or carry on? Why didn't anyone hear anything? Because when Trenny stepped off the trail, there was nothing to scream about because the person that she stepped off the trail to see was somebody that she knew.
That would make more sense than anything.
Right.
And the person that hunkered down and smoked these cigarettes and sipped from this beer was likely a male. They were taller and heavier, had bigger footprints. And Trenny would crouch down with Bob while he smoked a couple cigarettes, and she probably chatted to him and everything else. And we don't know what Bob told her.
Mm-hmm.
He might have said, yeah, I told your teacher, you know, you were going to get in with me and we were going to go fill in the blank, whatever town or city. And off they went. And then something happened. Bob didn't mean for it to happen. Don't get me wrong, but something went very, very wrong. And that's why Trenny's no longer here.
Yeah. Where do you think Trenny is now, Laura?
Well, Trenny's no longer among the living. I dream of her sometimes, and when I do dream of her, she's usually appears to me in a heaven-like setting. We sit on a bench, and there's a garden behind us, and whatnot, and she looks exactly the same as she did in 1976, dressed the same way. And once in a while, my mother will appear with us, and my mother died over 20 years ago. So I believe Trenny's long dead. I have no idea where her body is. I just believe it's lost to time.
Yeah. You just believe that she's at peace somewhere.
I don't believe she's really at peace because she never got a Christian burial.
True.
Her body basically has been, for lack of a better way to say it, discarded. But she hasn't had a Christian burial, and she's not at peace.
That's true.
Whenever I dream about her, and I am in no way psychic, and I on the fence with what happens in dreams because it is your subconscious working. But whenever she visits me in my dreams, she always tells me, you know, please help me. Please, you know, solve this case and whatever, because I can't really rest until you do. I need help. That's what drew me to Trenny in the beginning. When I first saw her picture on the Doe Network, was something in her eyes just pleaded to me, help me, you've got to help me. I've been missing all these years and nobody can seem to figure this out. But I believe Trenny knew the person that harmed her.
Of course.
Yeah.
And her family is rather split on it. Her mother believes that Trenny was harmed by the classmates, but she kind of blames them all as a whole. They're all involved. And I don't believe that, but they are guilty in such where they knew a lot more about what happened to Trenny on that October day in 1976 76 and they told.
Yeah.
They should have told somebody.
Yeah.
Instead of keeping it a secret or whispering it to around and whatever, and then it kind of snowballed, and then people were telling each other that you got to keep quiet, or the same thing that happened to Trenny is going to happen to you, and whatever, and then the threats started. I believe there's also a drug angle involved in all of this. I am not in any way accusing Trenny of taking drugs or selling drugs, but drugs definitely plays a major part in why she went missing.
She may have knew something or something.
Or saw something.
Perhaps her brother owed somebody money. It could have been a drug deal gone bad, but drugs does play a role in all of it.
Wow.
And her brother did suffer from addiction. He did seek help for addiction, and he had just been released from a VA hospital in Asheville in 2000, shortly before he passed away.
Do you think Trenny's case will ever be solved, Laura? Do you think it's solvable today?
It's solvable because cold cases are solvable, and typically they are solved due to two things. Changes in technology, such as DNA or genetic genealogy is a big one that helps solve the Golden State Killer mystery. And the other thing that solves cold cases are changes in relationships.
Yeah.
Somebody breaks up with somebody, wife, husband, partner, whatever, and somebody doesn't want to keep the secret anymore.
Right. Man, if they had only kept those beer cans.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a possibility. We don't have DNA evidence in this case because we don't know where Trenny is, and we haven't found anything of her.
Mm-hmm.
There's DNA in CODIS to compare if anything ever is found that's thought to belong to her. But Trenny's long deceased. I believe she died the same day that she disappeared.
Poor kid.
There's theories that she may be buried in the park. I don't put much stock in those. I've rolled it over in my head. I thought of it. I thought maybe she was pitched over a cliff somewhere, something like that. That park was searched very thoroughly, and all they came up with was a few footprints, cigarette butts, and a beer can. And
Crazy.
then her dogs traced the scent to the the Collins Gap parking lot. Her scent was picked up at the Clingman's Dome Tower as well, and it was also picked up at the spot where she stepped off the trail and hunkered down, likely with this person that was smoking and drinking beer.
Yeah. And possibly taken out of the park.
And Trenny would have gotten off that trail for some random stranger that was, hunkered down, sipping a beer and smoking, not on your life. The other theory, though, maybe she'd get off trail for another girl. That's a possibility, but not for a stranger.
It's just a crazy story. I mean, I've been wanting to do this case for a long time. How can people, if they have any tips or anything they want to say about this case, how can they get in touch with you, Laura?
They can get in touch with me through my website at www.canadiangirl77.com, and they can leave me a message through there. I typically answer within an hour or two. Donnie knows that.
Yeah, you were right on top of it when I messaged you. Yeah.
I get an alert. An alert comes to my phone. So
yeah.
I see it right away. So I answer all messages personally. All comments that are posted on the site, they come to me, and I have to approve them before they show on the actual site.
Mm-hmm.
To prevent getting those scam messages and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
If it doesn't pertain to Trenny or it's derogatory in any way, well, obviously it doesn't get put on the site. But I do answer all the messages personally, and I've gotten that from a lot of folks that have dropped me a line. They're like, "Wow, I didn't expect you were going to turn around and answer me." And I said, "Oh yes." I said, "Sometimes it might take me a day, but I said I'll always get back to you."
And that's Canadian Girl 77, girl with a U.com.
Yes, girl with a U, 77.com.
We'll definitely put a link to that in the show notes and on our website and on our social media accounts and help keep that word out there on Trenny's case.
And you can also contact the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and the phone number also appears on my site. Trenny's case is still open.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
It hasn't been closed. And she still appears on the National Park Service website for missing persons for the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. Well, actually, all the national parks across the United States.
Yeah.
They have their missing person roster. But
Okay.
Trenny is on there as well.
But there is a ton of information on your website about Trenny. Everybody wants to go there and check it out. A lot more details than we covered in this episode.
A lot of photos.
Yeah, especially a lot of photos.
I try to leave it up to folks to ascertain for themselves what they think happened to Trenny. But my bottom line is this: she did meet with foul play. She did know the person that harmed her, or know of them. I believe she would have stepped off that trail only if she knew the person that she was stepping off for. And she was crazy about her older brother, Bob. Bob came home on Wednesday. Trenny disappeared on Friday.
Yeah. Crazy story.
Yep.
It is a crazy story. Robert Simpson, he was a good friend of Bob's. I believe he covered a lot of things that he shouldn't have covered up. Robert should have talked more than he actually did, but his father probably warned him to keep quiet, keep out of it. You know, like, who knows what he was told, but he definitely got some legal counsel there.
Yeah. Especially tracking a bear theory. Yeah.
Students, especially the class of 1977, they know what happened to Trenny, but they just don't really want to talk about it.
Crazy.
Yeah, sad.
And there were threats issued. A lot of people were threatened by this whole thing. And like I said, that's why I believe there's a drug angle involved, because a lot of people were told to shut up. There were also a lot of people that were afraid. There's still people afraid to this day. They're willing to speak to me, but I use a false name for them. I invent a name for them. They go under a pseudonym because they don't want their actual name used because they're local to the area.
Yeah. Well, Laura, we really appreciate having you on the show tonight.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure.
It's been a better pleasure for us because we've been wanting to do this for a while, and having you with your knowledge on Trenny, that's a plus.
Yeah, great insight, for sure.
Yeah.
And if any of your listeners have any questions or comments or would like something cleared up, please feel free to reach out to me through my website at www.canadiangirl77.com, and I'll be sure to answer you.
Well, thank you very much, Laura.
Thank you. You guys have a great night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, Dale. We want to thank Laura Riste again for being on the show.
Yep.
She's just awesome. Her knowledge on Trenny Gibson is just amazing.
Great stuff, man.
Yep. All right, guys, we are going to get out of here.
Let's roll.
We want everyone to be safe, be careful, and always be aware of your surroundings.
Because the next episode could be about you.
This is the Crack House Chronicles.